If you talk to most trainers, they'll tell you either have to pick between building muscle by being in a calorie surplus or losing body fat by being in a calorie deficit. However, body recomposition is certainly possible. I've had many clients who stayed near the same weight, but seen improvements in their body composition. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously, even as an advanced lifter. Now, don't get me wrong, especially if you want to do everything you can to build more muscle, it's going to be more optimal to be in a calorie surplus. The problem is you don't need a large surplus to do so, and being in a large surplus is just going to have you gaining a lot more body fat than is necessary without building much, if even any more muscle than a small surplus. And trust me, I'm speaking from experience here. I've gone too far to the other side, but even with that, you don't even necessarily need a small surplus to build either. Many of the trainers that will argue you can't do both will say, yes, there are some instances where you can do both, but they'll limit it to just 3 things, which I'm going to talk about here, but I'm going to argue that there are 5 main reasons, and even experienced lifters can benefit from this. I'm not even talking about long-term recomp, where yes, like if you take myself for instance, I've probably put on around maybe 30 pounds of muscle since I was a teenager, and if you look at pictures of me around 160 pounds, clearly there's a dramatic difference here, but that's going to be done over longer phases, and yes, building and cutting phases. You're not going to do that in just one phase of recomping, if only it were that simple. Now, maybe if you were the first scenario where people can lose fat and build muscle simultaneously and you're on steroids, yes, you get on that and certainly some crazy things can happen. Not something I would recommend. I'm a lifetime natural. Do your own research. If you think it's best for you, that's your business. There's a lot of potential side effects, but hey, it's your body, do what you want, but that is the first scenario where you can do both. The second would be if you're a true beginner to training. You've never lifted in your entire life, and especially if you're obese at the same time, your body's going to respond well to pretty much any training stimulus, and you've got plenty of energy reserves with the extra body fat, so that's going to help fuel that muscle building while simultaneously losing. The third reason where it's easier to see recomp is if you were training before, but now you had a long layoff, whether that was from injuries or life happened and you just stopped lifting, and now you come back later. Muscle memory is very real. In fact, I have an example of myself here where I couldn't lift for about 12 weeks, and you can see how even though I stayed about the same weight, the body composition between the two was very different. So that's the 3 that most people would agree with. However, there's 2 other scenarios where you can make some changes, and the first is being more effective with your training stimulus. One of those might be you just haven't been pushing yourself in the gym, not getting anywhere near close to failure. And I'm not saying you have to train to failure, but it's good to challenge this occasionally so you can see what it's like, because you do want to be within about 1 to 3 reps of failure to maximize the benefit of that. And if you never go to failure, you don't know what it feels like, you could be leaving a lot of reps in the tank. And if you aren't making those ugly faces and challenging your body hard, you're not going to maximize the benefit from your training. You could also get on a more optimal training split. A lot of people just do 1 muscle group per day, per week, and that's pretty suboptimal. Research has pretty consistently shown if you train each muscle group multiple times per week, it is more effective than 1 time per week, even when total training volume is equated. And this is likely because as you lift, you get increases in muscle protein synthesis in those muscles. And if you're getting that twice per week over just once per week, it stands to reason you're going to build more muscle. Another thing you could be doing is rushing through the movements. This is something that even though I've been lifting for so long now, I kind of got away from this. And I'm telling you, I've been noticing lately, I'm slowing down the movements, especially the eccentric portion, the lowering of the weight, and then squeezing hard at contraction and just really making sure I'm focusing on that muscle itself. And I'm noticing some nice muscle growth here that I didn't think I would see at this phase. So that's another thing you can do, is make sure you're really concentrating on that mind-muscle connection and not just trying to go from point A to point B with your movements. And then you want to focus on progressive overload. And I usually recommend between around 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week for most people. And however advanced you are is kind of where you're going to fall in that spectrum. And the 5th reason you might see some recomp is just dialing in your nutrition, especially if you get on a more optimal protein intake. Protein is far and away the most important macronutrient there is. It's literally what builds muscle. So muscle is built by having muscle protein synthesis being greater than muscle protein breakdown, and you're not going to get that without a sufficient amount of protein. So while I usually recommend around 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, or at least your lean body mass, to me you're better off making sure you have enough, even if you are quote unquote wasting some of it, than leaving some in the tank. And I do recommend, if you want to maximize things as much as possible, is evenly splitting that protein up about 4 times per day, around every 4 to 6 hours, to make sure you're utilizing as much protein as you can per meal, because you can only use so much protein in one sitting for anabolism. As far as carbs and fats, I usually say it doesn't matter too much, but I will say carbs are more anabolic. They are protein sparing. They help fuel your performance. So I usually recommend around 20 to 30% of your calories from fat and the rest from carbs. And then the other thing that can make a big difference is, of course, really paying more close attention to your nutrition, weighing your food on a food scale, not getting really sloppy with things on the weekends, and making sure you're accounting for everything and staying on plan. It can do wonders for your body recomp. Now, those may be the main things, but there are some smaller details, especially for advanced lifters, that can make a difference. One being getting on creatine, especially if you're a plant-based eater, because you're not going to be getting much creatine through your diet. And creatine is far and away the most research-backed, tried and true supplement there is for building muscle size, muscle strength, work capacity in the gym. It can make a big difference. So I recommend taking 3 to 5 grams per day. It doesn't matter when you take it, just take it consistently, and don't worry if you see a couple pound spike on the scale. Remember, that's creatine, phosphate, and water storing in your muscles, something that you want. Sleep and stress can also make a much bigger difference than you think. I really believe that sleep is the most underrated thing there is when it comes to health, fitness, muscle, fat loss, anything. If you're not sleeping well, you're not going to recover well. And there's plenty of research to show when people lack sleep, they lose less body fat. It impacts muscle protein synthesis and things like your anabolic hormones. So you want to make sure you're controlling sleep and stress as much as you can. But regardless, you're going to be eating right around maintenance to try to create this recomp. But of course, if you're trying to eat around maintenance, well, then you need to know what your maintenance calories are, and you probably have no clue what that is. So to know how to find your maintenance calories and use what I consider to be the only accurate calorie calculator there is out there, make sure you check out this top video next, and I'll show you how to find this. Otherwise, I think you'll like this bottom video instead, and I'll see you in one of those other videos.